The second part of our sin series, as I prepared today, I realized we're pushing it to, we're gonna probably have to pick it up after I come back. I don't wanna shortchange it. I think as I dug into even just, I mean, I tried to get, I barely, I'd cut out a lot to get to the New Testament. So we'll see if we get to the New Testament, because there's just a lot in that Old Testament. There's a lot in Genesis, and if we don't fully understand it, if you don't have that baseline for how sin is operating and really how ultimately three Abrahamic religions establish what sin is. So sin as a definition, as an understanding, comes out of Judaism, comes out of Christianity, and comes out of Islam. And those are all going to contribute to that because they all start with the foundational documents of Genesis. Because they're all Abrahamic religions. Prior to Abraham, this is the story of human civilization. And so when we talk about human civilization, we talk about the way humans started. That really is what we're going to sort of wrap our head around. So we're going to look at a number of passages. Genesis 3, we sort of touched on that last week. I want to go over and read a couple of those passages and sort of explore them. We want to talk about Genesis 4, the Cain and Abel story. There's a lot that we can glean from there. We want to talk a little bit about the Noah story and what happened in that, and then we'll touch on the Tower of Babel, and then we'll jump ahead from there, getting into Moses and the law. So I want to go back, though, and I'm going to read and sort of comment, so if you want to follow along. Genesis 3 is where we get much of our doctrine of who humans are, of their nature of sin, and how they function. And so I'm not going to spend much time on the serpent. There's lots of ideas around what that serpent relationship was with us. There's lots of connections between the enmity between the serpent and Eve. Again, that does not deal with sin. It deals with redemption in the same way. So, but I'll read the passage just so we can kind of get an overview. So this is from Genesis 3 and from the Bible, same version in the pew. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord had made. So we often say this was the devil, and God truly made Lucifer this high power. But what we see in this is the serpent was more crafty. So when we read that, we understand that that's an attribute of an animal, craftiness. Something we often assign to the fox in this world, but there was something about God made this. Was more crafty than any other wild animal that God had made. So that does not sound like an exalted Lucifer. That does not sound like the Prince of Darkness. We often think that this was the personification of evil. It was an accuser, it was a tempter, but the narrative and your image of the original fall would be filled in with correct details. So let's just first disabuse our notions of this was Satan. He said to the woman, so this serpent, did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it or you shall die. Okay, so in a world where there is no sin, they've been placed in this paradise. All their food is provided for them. God's dwelling with them. God places something in the middle of the garden, a tree of some, and we often view it as an apple tree. It has also been probably more secondly displayed as a pomegranate tree. But the truth is, we don't have any clue what kind of fruit it was. It was like grape, and they just popped it in their mouth. I don't know. Probably not. But that would be interesting if it was, given the role of the grape in the New Testament. Yes, Jim. I'm just saying that so Dave knows who's asking the question.
Why did he test us? I mean, why did he do that?
Well, that's a great question, because my next thing I was going to say is that there's a parallel between the temptation that Adam and Eve faced in the middle of the garden and the temptation that Jesus has in the 40 days of the wilderness. And both of those you see, and Christ is called the second Adam. And we'll look at that in Paul in Romans 5. And so there's this parallel between them that we have to draw. So I think I told you this before. When I was in grad school at Wheaton doing my master's in systematic theology, we were studying why God had to become human. I wrote this sort of in this medieval scholastic sort of format of question and answer, a proposition that if Adam and Eve had denied the temptations Like if they had resisted the serpent in that moment, there would have been another temptation. And then there would have been another temptation. And my argument was that Christ was tested 3 times before he went into ministry, or went into, the full ministry, or full Spirit, being led by the Spirit. And then in the story of Christ's temptation, then the tempter leaves, and Christ is now free. That doesn't mean that the tempter wasn't there, but the temptation is there. So I made the argument that if Adam and Eve had actually just resisted 3 times, that maybe this whole thing would have not been there.
Well, it seems like God is a gamer. Is that why you take up gaming?
God's, you know what? So here's the thing. We often are like, why would God do that? Like, why would God put a tree in? Well, we get hints of that in Job, where God said, where the accuser comes and says, Job is not perfect. If all of his blessings, if all of the good things are taken away from him, then he will curse you. And God's like, well, go for it, tempt him. And so there's some sense of, in a perfect paradise where there is no sin, but yet evil still exists in the world, maybe that's a shining on a narrative that happened in this divine council that we often reference in Scripture, or see reference in Scripture, where the evil one was saying, hey, of course they're going to worship you. That's all they've been given to do. But where's love in that? And this is the argument that goes throughout theology, is that if Adam and Eve had been given no will to love, no will to choose other than God, that's not true love. The challenge of that argument is, what's the afterlife going to look like? Are we going to again have the option to choose against God, to choose for ourselves, to engage, to sin, to partake of something beyond us? And the answer, for most accounts, is no. That removing this bad option that brought us into this sinful state will not be there. It'll be this place of just more like the seraphim and the cherubim. They're just worshiping, that's all they know how to do. So it could be this refining. Honestly, I think there is more credence in my mind to that we're living in a state of almost purgatory, a nod to the Catholic theology, because purgatory is about the refinement of your life, the sanctification, and what they're saying, that, when people are paying indulgences or praying or doing Hail Marys for people in purgatory, they're trying to improve their status, get them more sanctified. Well, isn't that what we're all trying to do? Aren't we trying to be better? Aren't we trying to live, better lives? Aren't we trying to be more disciples? So I'm not saying this is purgatory, but if you watch the show Lost, there are many thought that was. And if you ever looked at it through that lens.
How would they have had any concept of what death was? It says...
They wouldn't.
But it said, you read in there that if you eat this fruit, you could die.
Well, what did
that mean to them?
Probably nothing. But, this was also written how many thousands of years after them? Oh. Moses scribed this.
This is the first time I've ever thought or picked up that even if they touched it, not even eat it, it says if you touched it.
Yeah. Well, and that's, that's interesting, that if you should touch it, or you shall, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die. Yeah, it always makes me wonder if they were like, boop. Nothing happened yet. We just rubbed the side of it. So to answer your question, though, Jim, we don't know why God placed the knowledge, the tree there, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. From a Reformed perspective, we would say that the fall was blessed, because if the fall had not happened, Christ would not have come into this world. Christ would not have incarnated, and we wouldn't have seen and experienced and had eyewitness of the fullest revelation of who Christ is in Jesus. I don't think that's a good answer. I guess at the end of the day, do I think God designed? Did God know? Maybe God knew. To say that God did not have the capacity to know that Adam and Eve were going to sin would say that God either had to self-limit to not know, or know and move forward in that.
Well, if they hadn't sinned, it would forever just be Adam and Eve.
Save for the fact that there was a command to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth within the commandments. So the Adamic covenant, same as the Noahic covenant, was be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. This is why the Tower of Babel became so problematic, because everyone came together and God's commandment was to fill the earth. There was a sending out. You see the parallel between the Babel of sending out and the Pentecost of the sending out the Spirit. Both are deal with other languages. Both have a sending out, a sort of spreading of it. So, okay, let's carry on. Verse 4, but the serpent said to the woman, you will not die, which is a total lie. Let's just acknowledge, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, here's the thing. So this implies that they did not know evil. There was no concept of evil. There was no understanding of evil. There was no understanding of that which is opposite of God. And I kind of see it as like they were in a little bit of a dome. But your eyes will be open. So in other words, they'll see differently. They'll see the world in a different light. They'll see others differently in relationship to them.
Something else too, animals could talk, huh?
Yeah, and they had legs and arms. Last dinosaur, always going with that. The serpent was a raptor. Those crafty raptors. They were craftier than the T-Rexes. Anyone seeing the Jurassic Park movie this week? That's very exciting. But here's the thing. The knowledge of good and evil, that's the key. This is what differentiates us from animals. Animals don't know good and bad. You know, when I'm walking with Louie, he tries to attack a little baby squirrel that one time, or that bunny on the ground, had it in his mouth and was like shaking it everywhere. I'm saying, bad, let go of that bunny. He doesn't know. There's no good or bad in the animal kingdom world. It's just the kingdom. They respond with response and stimulus. They just do what they do. Whereas we, because we have the image of God in us, can process things and make conscious decisions. And so what he's saying is, in a world where there were just desserts, now there's bad things for you. I guess that's not a good, we see desserts as being bad too. In a world of only apples, everyone's great. But the minute you introduce an ice cream cone. But here's the difference. The knowledge of good and evil, the awareness of evil, the awareness of, and then that is such an important part, because when we talk about sin, we're relating to sin as that some reflection or aspect of what is evil. And again, we go back to last week, did God create evil? Well, if God created everything, God had to create evil. Because if God didn't create everything, then evil exists outside of who God is. And then the claim that God is the creator and supreme of all being of all things no longer holds. So you have to sort of hold on to that consistency. Jim.
I'm sorry. After this, I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
But you're saying they did know evil.
They did not know evil.
So then how could they have sinned?
How could they have, first of all, the original sin was the transgression against God's commandment, the one commandment they had.
Right.
So in Hebrew understanding of sin is a transgression against God's ordinances, commandments, and breaking the relationship or doing that which God does not desire.
Yeah.
And then that you have to take a step back and say, well, what does God desire? And that goes into, farther steps back into that paragretical notion of a constant self-giving nature. Adam and Eve were invited into a dance of self-giving. And when they did this, now they became aware of the fact, I would say, that they could also not be self-giving. It introduced a whole new paradigm into their mindset. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, which I think is interesting, because it's not that it's good for gaining, it just was good for food. Oh, I can eat it. And then it was a delight to the eyes, and no doubt it was there as a temptation, so it wasn't like an ugly piece of fruit that you're like, I'm not touching that thing. And it probably didn't smell like a durian fruit. You ever smelled durian? Yeah. It smells like someone just vomited in a watermelon, sealed it up, and handed it to you. That's what it smells like. It doesn't taste like that, though. But you got to get it past the nose, too. And that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, and that wisdom is the knowledge between good and evil. Again, going back to going ahead to Solomon Solomon knew the difference between good and evil. He knew how to adjudicate things. He had a sense of right and wrong, light and darkness. So she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. So the whole time I'm wondering, like, as this conversation's happening with Eve, where was that? Adam was just like, what's going on there? You know, if I saw Shannon talking to some dinosaur or something, I might come over and see. So then this is the consequence. Then the eyes of both were opened. This was instantaneous. Upon eating, this happened. And they knew that they were naked. So now what does this tell you? So let's stop there. What does that tell you? They knew they were naked.
Well, now they're feeling shame, sinful shame.
They're feeling, but see, this is the challenge of the nakedness. What does nakedness have to do with sinfulness?
Yeah, actually.
No, I know. This is the whole thing has been a big lie.
Yeah. So, yeah, why would they think that?
Why is streaking wrong?
Yeah, why did you, yeah, what was the big deal with them being naked?
So when their eyes opened, they knew good and evil. So something changed. Now this is where we don't often talk about this, and this is where I'm going to insert, I've said this before, I think that they metaphysically changed. Because something did change. Their eyes were open, so you can't deny that. Something changed in their, now you could say, were their eyes actually opened? Probably not, they were probably open, so it's a metaphor, their eyes now saw. So something in their brain, in their cognition of the world switched. And now they know some sense of evil. But it doesn't say that there other things in their bodies didn't also switch. I think that they knew that they were naked is because I think in that moment their metaphysics changed.
Yeah.
You think they turned into men and women?
I think that they were given skin.
Now,
Or an awareness of their skin in a fallen, in other words, they had sensitivity. And then it goes on, it says, they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. This is where you get into the trickiness of sexuality. Why were loincloths in particular needed? My only understanding of that, and again, this is grouping, this is Moses writing thousands of years later, being inspired and having oral traditions and all sorts of things that led to this understanding. But as the Hebrews do, or as the Jews do, they believe that the first 5 books of the Old Testament were given divinely by God, and we hold that pretty much as well, although there's some problems, like how does Moses write about his death before he dies? But he did, unless there were also some additions and sort of corrections and things that happened later. But the loincloths themselves, if I had to guess, it has been interpreted related to sexuality and sort of a taboo of sexuality for some time for most of the church, in fact. I think it has to do with our excrement. Go in the bathroom. It's not like they had toilet paper and like perhaps it was like, you know what, let's cover some stuff up because this is the stuff that is getting rid of all the stuff in us that we don't want. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to over-sexualize it because what if our understanding of men and women in relationships today, there was just the two of them, what was so problematic?
They're husband and wife.
Well, they weren't necessarily husband and wife because there was no like what made them husband and wife.
But if they just become physical beings, then maybe this is where they realize that they looked different.
I think they realized their physicality. Yeah, maybe they realized that difference. I mean, I don't think, cows or gorillas or monkeys, when they procreate, they're like sexualizing their mating process. Mm-hmm. They procreate because it's a natural instinct, because that's the propagation of the species. It's not dressed up, it is what it is. But I think what you see in this is the first act after that fall of self-preservation. I'm cold. And you got to wonder, like, how do they sew? I mean, like, even the notion of the sewing fig leaves together, like, where'd they get these needles? Where'd this thread come from? I think what it means is they were trying to cover themselves. There was a realization that something had changed.
How does Moses know this?
It's given by God, direct. I mean, that's the belief. They heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, something they did. This was normal. And the man said to his man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of God among the trees of the garden. So obviously they thought they could escape God. So this is the first result of sin: self-preservation and hiding, fear, shame. And again, these are results of sin. These are the conditions we find ourselves in. But the Lord called to the man and said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." And he said, "Who told you you were naked?" So probably, there was a sense of nakedness there before. And then God knows, obviously God's sort of setting him up, cheeky Jesus, cheeky God. "Have you eaten from the tree of which I've commanded you not to eat?" As if God didn't know. Like, oh, now so he's playing with them. The man said, "The woman who you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit and I ate it." There's another sin, blame shifting. Who did it? They did it. Not me. Then the Lord said to the woman, playing along, "Well, okay, then what happened to you? What is this you've done?" And the woman said, "The serpent tricked me and I ate." And in some sense, the serpent did. The serpent lied. The serpent was tricked. But it doesn't make a difference because the commandment was not to participate in this. So here's the point we want to make at this point. Something changed. Something changed in their understanding of themselves. Something changed in their understanding of their relationship with God. To go from walking with the creator of the universe in the cool of the evening to hiding, to feeling the elements, to recognizing that the world has evil in it. Okay, real quick, I'll just read through. In 14, the Lord said to the serpent, "Because you've done this, cursed are you among the animals and among all of the wild creatures." As we know, he's an animal and he's wild, and also, that makes you think about what were the wild animals, because there were animals in the garden that Adam and Eve had great relationships with. But there were wild animals outside of the garden. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat. We said that last night. Well, upon your belly you shall go. That means whatever arms or legs were there, whatever was carrying the serpent before, no longer. So the serpent incurred a pretty significant supernatural change, if you're going to take it in a literal sense. And you shall eat dust. Dust you shall eat all the days of your life. In other words, you're being incarnated. You're now a captive of this world. So this is a result of sin. The world has changed. Or the world outside the garden is now, will be inhabited by God's, those who bear the image of God. Number 15, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. This goes to Christ all the way, and we're not going to get into that because that's about redemption. But here's what I wanted to just touch on again, as we did last week at the very end. To the woman he said, "I will make your pangs and childbirth exceedingly great. In pain you shall bring forth children." Now, I've got to wonder, again, I think this is a part of the incarnation. Something in that supernatural state was not about pain. It didn't exist. And other passages say increasingly painful, or increase your pain. So there might have been maybe some theoretical discomfort.
But what, she's never had a child, so why would she, I'm really confused by all of this.
Well, but she wouldn't have understood it until she had that.
Oh, okay.
But maybe before that it was like a slip and slide, I don't know. Just popping them out left and right. That's what. No, was that too far? I told you this is what you get at 6:30, Jason. If you want PG-13, you got to go earlier in the day. All right, and here's where I think this is the next part of the verse is for me very important. Yet your desire shall be for your husband, or really what the translation is the man, or your mate, and he shall rule over you. This describes sexuality and patriarchy for the last X number of thousands of years. I do not think, and this is Jason now, I do not think sexuality existed prior to the fall. I think sexual inclination existed in order to procreate in the same way it did in the animal kingdom, perhaps, or in some, but the very desire that if it says, your desire shall be for your husband, well, what was woman's desire before that? It wasn't a man and all of our wonderful offerings. But desire is a complicated word, but I think that that is a desire to mean, in other words, you've broken the, and again, I should go back and say, it could have been thousands of years before this tree ever was even, maybe they were living and they were just dwelling. Like this is, we don't know the time sequence of this. But what we do know is that desire was placed in the woman, and her desire for the man would be for security, for sexuality, for safety. And I know that in a liberated world, they're like, well, I don't need that. And again, as I said last week, I challenge you to find, even in my 52-year-old state, a woman in this town who could take me down. Why do men rule over women? You want to take? Come on, Glenda, bring it on.
She'd take you out.
I don't know.
But my point is this, the entry into the natural biological world, by and large in the natural biological animal kingdom, males are bigger, stronger, faster, are designed to get food, designed to protect. This is the norm in the biological world, and when we entered into that biological world, we were put into the same schema.
But there are other kinds of strength besides physical strength.
Yes, in a modern world, in an enlightened world, and in a world post the Holy Spirit giving us rationality, I 100% agree with you. But that's why it's important to understand the curse, because that's what makes what happened in Pentecost so important. In Pentecost, the Spirit coming reversed the curse, restored the image of God in us. Therefore, the things that happened in the fall are part of our job to reverse and to live in the reversal of that. So men should not dominate women. And does that mean that women's desire shouldn't be for the man? Well, it's biological binding. I would say men's desire for women are probably more. But in some sense, here's the thing. You go back even to the creation of Adam and Eve. When Adam was there, Adam didn't need a woman. Not for procreation, because that had not been given to people, to God. To the commandment had not been given to procreate, because there was nothing to procreate with. And if Adam wasn't going to face death, then who cares?
But he needed
But why?
a partner.
He was alone.
Alone. There you go. God saw that he was alone because Adam was living in this sphere of this globe and not dwelling in the heavenly realms. Adam had some sense of human anatomy and some sense of human, incarnation. And so God gave Adam something that resembled him, but also still fell within this biologically created order. I mean, everything in the world that reproduces through a system. It's a biological system. In fact, I've often argued, I know that lots of people say lots of things about the biological nature of homosexuality. I think that there's more of a case to argue against, like what Paul did in the natural order of things, to say this isn't natural. It's not design. Yes, dolphins procreate for pleasure. We always like to throw that out there, and there are a few other anomalies. But the general 99% of the created order has a system of procreation. Does that mean anything that deviates that from is sin? That's a question we're going to ask. But at a face value, the naturally created order that was designed by God for procreation and the propagation of a species happens through a male and a female, and that's the words we use for it. But two opposite or complementary beings that form and reproduce.
Well, and when Eve was the one that did the sin first and then handed it to Adam. So to say that she has to desire him could be a curse. Before that, she didn't have a need or a
No, yeah,
want.
yeah.
The word desire can mean now you're going to live with needing something or wanting
Yes, yeah.
something.
Well, I think that,
Which is not, which could be a curse.
well, it is, and I think that notion of propagation of safety, what you need, your desire is, and this is why, you know, you can go back and look at anthropological studies, why, I said this last week, why did men typically go to the largest, strongest guy, and, you know, if you were lucky, if you were the largest, strongest guy in the tribe, because he could protect you. We don't live in that society, now it's flipped, now it's wealth. It's not a person who's the biggest and the strongest, it's the person who has the most money, because that represents the most opportunity for flourishing in our material sense. So you can change the attribute that people that women ascribe to, but the same thing is true today. The desire is still for safety. The desire is still for protection. Yes, we've liberated to some extent, but also, and so that's the patriarchy of that. I think it's baked in, and that's not to say that there's not equity still that could by far more be reached, but the sense of that rule, that patriarchy, it's the natural law of the, you know, it's sort of the natural law of the jungle. Yeah.
Summarizing
You
all
wanna go?
this, what's happened since the apple, actually, man and woman have been given knowledge.
Yes.
Because before that, they didn't really need all that knowledge.
Ignorance is
All of this
bliss.
that you said, it may be curses, it may be
Yeah.
this, it may be that, but actually, when in reality, it's all knowledge.
Yeah. Yes, no, it is. And so here's the thing, and I've said this before about materialism. If you want to take out our brains and our cognition, the way we perceive the world, what is sin? Is a bobcat attacking a chicken or a mountain lion taking down a deer? Is that sin? No. If you want to just, and again, take out our rationality, our brains. So one against another, if it's just in the material world, who cares? Things die, things go. It's just a cycle of things. There's nothing inherently wrong about it. It's when we have our conscience. And this is what the ability to know between right and wrong. And so when sin enters the world, it enters the world through a sin of humanity, it's sin of Eve and Adam. But the sin is not counted against Eve, it's counted against Adam. And some say that the original sin that Eve actually was the desire for more. And that because there was a desire to want more. And there are extreme feminists who will say that women actually ruled the Garden of Eden. They were in power, and that it was an overthrowing of that power, which is why the serpent came to her. But, go take the trash out. Who's the boss?
Being a woman, see, they saw something shiny, and all the girls like something shiny.
Oh, now you're just, this is, sorry everyone, that's a result of the fall.
I apologize.
You want to say anything other, but the point I want to make, because we are going to talk about it when we get into the New Testament and we get into Paul, and as we start to think about what sin is I do think sexuality did not exist before that, and I do not think sexuality will exist after that. And I think how we wrestle with our understanding of sexuality coming into this world, our understanding of what it does and what its purpose is, I think has a dramatic effect on who we are as Christians that we've ignored. Sexuality had a purpose when we were placed into this world, and now that it had even more of a purpose, the manner in which we had entered into the world with, again, I would say we went from a self-giving space with the capacity to sin to a place of self-preserving. That's how I sort of defined sin last week. Sin is our desire to preserve and protect and serve ourselves.
Yeah, I hope people won't be on the heretic.
We do already, so go ahead.
But, a lot of things that comes to my mind is thinking that these words were written by men. Yeah, I know that it's supposed to be the word of God, but I really wonder about that.
And it's okay to wonder, Ben. I think, and I have too, the challenge of the Bible is it's all written by men.
I know.
And there's a fallenness. And as I've said over the last 5 years, the perfection of the Bible is not something I teach. I think the truth in the Bible is absolute. The manner in which it comes to us is broken because God used humans to give it to us. So did Moses, you know, and I don't know if you've, I'm a sort of a quasi fan of Jordan, I don't want to say a fan. I listen to Jordan Peterson. If you ever listen to Jordan Peterson, liberals don't like him because of his more traditional view of sexuality and gender identity. Conservatives don't like him because has a sort of this dream analytical psychological sequence around the evolution of the Bible. And honestly, I would put him in the realm of a Christian. I think his thinking is there, but I just think he's just explored it in all different ways. But he sees it as an unfolding oral tradition / dream sequence, and he explains that in much better terms than I could. But the idea is, I think as Christians today, we hold that this is God's revealed truth, and it's our job to figure it out. So yes, I think the criticism is valid and worthwhile holding in tension with as we read Scripture, that it was written by men, but at the same time,
No,
But at the same time, I also think we have to be mindful of the fact that we have to hold this as God's word.
If there was no sexuality, then why does the Bible make a clear point about the fact that God created male and female? When he did the animals too, male and female.
Procreation.
Right, but then he could have created another man as a companion for Adam. Why did it?
But then it would just been the two of them. Then he'd been like, 3 is better than 2.
But that was before procreation for humans even had been an issue. So he wanted a companion, but he made it a female.
Well, I think that's the Adamic covenant. Before they started the work, before they did the naming, before they did, God said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, gave them this garden. They hadn't earned it. It was a covenant of grace. And it came with one stipulation: don't eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But I think that it's important to understand that sexuality, I think, came in because that means that sexuality as we understand it is a fallen endeavor. It is a part of our fallen nature. It is because it's self-seeking.
Something she just made me think about. Okay, if there was just Adam, right, just the man, but there was animals already in the forest because God made them, right?
In the garden.
Were they male and female?
Probably.
So there already were females. There was already an opposite.
The notion of, look at the way that, the complexity of the world is, majestic. Okay. From an egg and a sperm, you have the complexity of a human body and a personality. I can't even,
But the thing was, instead of 2 men,
it wasn't Adam and Steve, it was Adam and Eve, because they were complementary. But again, sexuality had not entered the world, so it wasn't a problem.
But it had, because they were animals.
Would you say that cows have a sexuality, or would you say cows have?
They were male and female.
Well, that doesn't. But sexuality. Honestly, this is the challenge of the conversation we have today around sex and gender. Sex are what parts you have in your pants. Gender is how you identify of masculinity or femininity and social constructs that are informed by biological features. But at the same time, they're 2 different things. Sex, procreation between a male and a female biologically is not the same thing as the desire that centers around sexuality. If there were no sexual ethics and everyone would just be going and having sex with everyone because that's the fallenness of our being. Why? Because it's self-gratifying. Does that mean sex can't not be self-gratifying and can't be in a state of self-giving? Yes, of course it can. But I'm willing to bet if most of you look back over your sexual lives over the last X number of decades, most of those encounters were largely driven by selfish internal desires of self-gratification. Jim's like,
maybe.
You don't know me. They call me Don Juan. All right. You asked for it, Jim. All right, and the man, he said, because you have listened to the voice, here's the thing, because you have listened to the voice of the woman, this is where I think patriarchy comes in, and have eaten of the fruit of which I have commanded you, you shall not eat. Cursed is the ground because of you. So now the ground is cursed because of his action. We're going to see this again. In toil, so in work, in labor, you shall eat of it all the days of your life. So we went from plucking fruit freely, no work. It's like a nonstop drive-through in every tree. You just walk around, just eating. And now you're going to have to work it. And it's not like God gave them, a manual for planting. So there was, and the minute they're thrust into this garden, they can feel the wind, they can feel the cold, they can feel the night coming, they can feel the threat of wild animals.
Now, is that when they start eating meat?
Not yet, that's no, they have thousands of years before that happens. But it may be very well the case where Eve's like, well, now where? Look at us now. What are we going to do? And what are you going to do? You do something. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Where are we going to go? Like that first night was a pretty scary night. Talk about that first night on Survivor. This was a whole new, this is the original Survivor. Good luck with that. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, meaning the ground is cursed. It's not going to just yield fruit willy-nilly. It's not just going to just pop out of the ground. By this, you shall eat the plants of the field. So we changed. We went from fruit to vegetables. Because it was by the seed-bearing plant before. Now it's just the plant of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The man named his wife Eve. So Eve was nameless up to this point. It was like, hey, you. Hey. Shava is what it means, which means life, or living one, or to breathe. This is what Eve means. It also means the beginning. Where else did I write that? It means to breathe. In Latin and Hebrew, the origin comes from also life or animal. Now, what I think is interesting about this is Adam names Eve after the fall. And he names her life. And he also names her to breathe, or animal. And there is that sense of that incarnation into the world. Maybe they didn't breathe oxygen in the way we need oxygen. We need oxygen or we die. Maybe they need oxygen because there is no death. Well, some sort of spirit. And this is the thing, is we think very spirit world, material world. And the idea that there's anything in between is difficult for us to imagine, but I think there absolutely is other things in between. We're just, if you think there's only 6 colors and variations of those, there are probably thousands of colors that we can't detect. There are thousands of sounds we can't detect. Okay, so then it says, because she was the mother of all living things. And this is where we get the notion that they were our first parents. And the question is mother of all living things, what does living mean in that regard? Because it says that there were wild animals, there were already things living. So when it means living things, it means something different, living, a living humanity, an incarnated humanity. And then the Lord said, see, the humans have become like one of us. And again, the plurality of us, it's not one dude up there with a big white beard. There's a plurality there, Father, Son, Spirit, and again, those are accommodations to our understanding of biological relations. There's some sense of categorization of who they were. They become like us, knowing good and evil. So there's the distinguishing factor. That's what happened in the fall. And now they might reach out their hands and also take from the tree of life, which is interesting to me. That means there's a tree of life, and eat and live forever. So there was a tree that they could have eaten from that theoretically would have made them live forever and reverse the curse of death. Because that is what entered the world, the capacity to die, the materialization, the need for breath, the need for water. We're such fragile creatures. And honestly, if it wasn't for our brains, we would have all been eaten a long time ago. Because almost every animal in the wild kingdom is more physically powerful than us.
But it was a good thing in a way that they would die, because if a completely evil person lived forever, that would be... And
God limits that. And they were. I mean, it says, going to Methuselah, they were living 1,000 years. A vegetarian diet was pretty good with no, pollution. Therefore the Lord sent them forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which they were taken, meaning, and this is interesting, means that they did have some physicality in them in their original creation. They were made of some substance of the earth, but perhaps not the full substance of the earth that we find ourselves in. He drove the humans out into the east of the Garden of Eden. He placed a cherubim and a sword flaming and turned to the guard to guard the way to the tree of life. I love, if you've never seen the Simpsons Bible stories, there are 4 Bible stories in one episode, and it explains how all this happened of Adam and Eve, and it also explains the death of the unicorn, because Homer, who's Adam, uses the unicorn to dig back into the garden, doing its horn, and it gets on the other side in the garden and collapses. And then I think and then he's like, oh, that was the last one. All right, so now we know what's happened. A transgression has happened against God's commandments, and I think that the notion of sin entering the world, in its basis, and this is a very Hebrew understanding, is a violation or a transgression of God's commandments or laws. And there were no law at this point, so the commandment was simple: thou shalt not eat of this, and they did, and the punishment incurred. Now, so why did this need to occur for everyone? How many thousands years later we're born into this sinful state? Why did it happen to be that way? Well, this is the only thing we can just say, this is the way God designed it. I genuinely think there is some relationship to the physicality of a man's sperm that biologically in some way carries the seed of sin. And I said that last week because Jesus did not carry the seed of sin. Oh, and that goes back into the categories. I wrote them down. Passe, so I said passe, so passe means possibility, P-A-S-S-E, possibility. Pecare comes from the root word of sin, P-E-C-A-R-E, so to sin or to violate, and then non is no. So you have passe pecare, the possibility to sin. This is the state that Adam and Eve found themselves in the garden. This is the state that Jesus found himself in the first 30 years of his life. He had to have the possibility to violate God's law. In other words, it was a farce. Because if he didn't have any capacity to, which brings us to the next one, non passe pecare, so no possibility to sin. If Christ was in that condition, then that would have been, not a real temptation. This is the state we claim that we'll be in the afterlife, without the ability to sin. There will be no violation even possible, so we'll live in a state of sinlessness. Non-passe, non-pecare, no possibility not to sin. No possibility, non-pecare, no sin. No possibility, no sin. That's how we are now. There's no possibility not to sin. We're born into it. We do it automatically. We're self-preserving. We're incarnated beings. A child reaching up for milk from its mother, for love and affection, is its basic desire for self-preservation. Even at an infant level, I need something. I need someone. And we spend the rest of our lives doing this. This is why I go back to the idea that if incarnation into the world, if being subject to the elements of the world and the fears and the dangers of the world and our condition and our anxiety and fear and the death that all comes from that, we are put into a place where we have to protect ourselves because we're only concerned with ourselves. And this is what makes the gospel so important. Because if you believe the gospel that this world doesn't matter, then everything that they feared in that garden being kicked, or as they kicked out of the garden, doesn't matter. It's like that game analogy. If it doesn't matter in the game, it doesn't matter. If the only thing that matters is collecting the white cubes, then that's what you want to do so that you can go on and after the game you can win. You can have victory. So it is a victory over death and sin in the entire disposition of self-preservation. And this is why I go back to the idea, if you leave that piece of trash on the ground or push your cart and leave it in the parking lot, because you're too busy and you're only preserving your own time, yourself, knowing very well that it's going to cause some teenager in the rain to have to drag that thing over the curb and stick it in there. And yes, they're being paid to do that. But at the same time, that very action, that very notion of I'm going to protect me is the essence of sin. And the knowledge that you are protecting yourself, I think, is part of that conditioning that came in the fall. Okay, let's go into Genesis 4. this is the story of Cain and Abel. If you've, I'll read it bits and pieces here, and then we'll talk about it. And this is the reason this is important is after Adam and Eve were put in the garden, we have no record of their actions other than that they had Cain and Abel, and then after Cain died or Abel died, then the birth of Seth. Adam's mentioned a lot. And Eve are mentioned a lot, and there's a lot of connection there, but we don't know. And we don't know what happened that first night. We don't know what happened that first year. We don't know what happened that first 1,000 years. Maybe it was just the two of them. We don't know. But it says in chapter 4 of Genesis, verse 1, now the man knew his wife, which is to mean to know sexually, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man. Look what I did, with the help of the Lord. So she acknowledges that there. And next she bore him his brother Abel. Now Abel was the keeper of the sheep. And Cain, the firstborn, was the tiller of the ground. So we have a shepherd who's tending the flock, not eating them, probably tending them for their wool and their warmth. Maybe they were milking them, I don't know. I mean, there's sheep milk.
So were all the animals kicked out of the garden too?
No, I think that there were animals the wild animals were in, I see it as like a dome. Here's the globe. Then some say that actually in the middle of the Fertile Crescent in Israel, like where, like Sinai or where Jacob's ladder, that sort of thing, that was actually originally the location of the garden. Because it's like a portal through which God, like the notion of Jacob's ladder is the idea that there is a portal and that vision of angels ascending and descending. Is the idea that there's a holy spot on this earth where angels almost come in from another dimension, perhaps. I mean, it depends on how you want to interpret his dream sequence. Next, she bore his brother Abel. So in the course of time, and who knows how long, thousands of years, they were living to 1,000. They could have been like 600 years old for all we know. Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. Now, this is interpreted loosely. Is it the fruit of the ground in the sense of the fruit of the ground is the vegetables? Is it the fruit of the ground in the sense of it's the fruit that fell on the ground? What it definitely is, it really doesn't make a difference. What it definitely is, it does not signify it as his first fruits. It's like, in other words, Cain brought stuff to God in some form of submission and offering, but it wasn't the best. And for most theological commentaries, this is why they think this all went down. And Abel, for his part, brought the firstling of his flock and their fat portions. I should go back before I go. The other thing, and I recently heard this, and I'm still processing it. Someone said they actually think that the notion, they disagreed with me, and I'm just sort of ruminating the idea of that incarnation, that the skins of animals are actually our skin. That when it said God clothed them with the skins of animals, he thought that it meant that God killed animals in order to clothe them, and therefore the death of animals was introduced. For me, that's a bit of a leap, because I feel like that would have been part of the record of it. It's too ambiguous. But I also don't see them walking around in some buffalo coats or anything like that. So I go back to my idea that it's our skins. But the Lord, here's the part where we get stuck. So their fat portions, so he says the Lord brought his the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions. Well, that implies that they were dead, that they were eating them, and yet the scripture says that they were not eating animals at that point. God introduced, or maybe they were, maybe they were, and it was just not reckoned, but the permission to do so comes in the flood and Noah.
Did you say fat portions?
For fat portions.
It could be for heat, for light. They use the fat for burning, oil.
And it could be, the fat portions were considered valuable. They were considered high energy. I mean, fat was considered a good thing. So but the point is I think the idea is that he didn't hold the best back. He gave God, and it doesn't say whether he was dead. We don't know. But it does say that it goes into the next verse, and the Lord had regard for Abel, for the animal offering, and his offering. It doesn't say death offering or blood offering, but for Cain, his offering, he had no regard. Now, most people think because it was related to his attitude. So the question then becomes in the realm of sin, you have the submission of one to the deity of saying, I'm going to give you the best that I have. I'm going to give you all the things that I need and trust that you'll provide for me. The other says, I have to do it, so I'm going to get it. The self-preservation exists in Cain's offering in some sense because he's saying, I want the first fruits for myself. I'm going to bring you some stuff out of obligation, but I'm not going to give you everything. Is that a sin? By my schema, it is self-preservation, but sin had not really been understood. So why would God be satisfied with one and not satisfied with the other? So you have to go into the attitude, the disposition in which they brought. Because you have lots of people bringing first fruits out throughout the history of Israel and God being pleased by those offerings. So there had to have been something faulty with his offering, and we believe that was because in general it was not his best. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Because he rejected his offering, obviously. Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? So is God playing with him and saying, you brought me those, clearly your harvest wasn't great, knowing that he held back? God couldn't be like, oh, you did a bad job farming, you brought me what you had, but I'm going to punish you, reject your offering anyways. That's kind of that feels jerky. He tried. So clearly something about the way he brought it, and the fact that he says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? So clearly he wasn't doing well. And clearly what he offered wasn't in a proper spirit. And he says that if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. So this is the first mention of sin outside of the garden. And it doesn't say he's engaging in sin. He's saying sin is lurking at the door. It's desire. There you go. This is the part where when Paul talks about the desires of our flesh, your desires shall be for the man and he shall rule over you. Desires are related to sin. And in part, I think, because desires relate to self-preservation. Its desires is for you, but you must master it. You must master your human existence. You must master the desire for more. You must master the desire for self-preservation. Cain said to his brother, let's go into the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother. Abel killed him. Rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother? Obviously, he's playing along with him. And he's playing with him. He said, I don't know. I'm my brother's keeper. And the Lord said, now you are cursed from the ground, meaning enmity between the ground and humanity, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. So what he is doing is placing a negative response to killing somebody, and in part because blood is being shed. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield you its strength, so there was reduced production, and you will be a fugitive and a wanderer of the earth. Well, that just describes most human tribes. You want to go back to the Pre-Lithic, the Paleolithic, the earliest times. Again, we don't know how long these things. Why did humans they were nomadian, in the same way the Native Americans were, because of the ever-changing weather. And they didn't understand the weather, so they were always finding a new place, always looking for a place of stability. And it wasn't until they became an agrarian people and established themselves near river outlets where they had a constant source of water, they could build safety. And that goes on to the idea of the Tower of Babel, when they decided to find safety and security themselves. Yes?
Why did he kill him?
Jealousy.
Now, so it's jealousy. Why was he jealous?
Because God accepted.
Who made him jealous?
Because if you and I both work on a project together and Jim's like, Denny, yours just sucked. But Jason, yours was great.
So actually God made him jealous.
No, I think sin made him jealous. He saw that self-preservation. You receive favor. I'm not receiving favor. I don't want you to receive favor because I want that favor. That's self-preservation.
Why didn't God say, hey, you did the best you could?
Why wasn't God gracious with him? Well, I can't answer that. Maybe it just shows that God was not a vegetarian.
Maybe he didn't bring the best vegetables.
Yeah, well, I think that's what it is. He just brought something. It was the attitude, if you just come and you're kind of doing it halfway, no one's happy about that. And I think that's what and then he was jealous because he got, honored for his and
So is
his
that the first mention of jealousy in the Bible?
Probably. In chronological order.
Yeah.
I think that Lucifer, or the fallen angel, whatever we call the exalted, most beautiful, glorified angel, there was a sense of jealousy and pride there. And that's probably the prototype for us. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear, because if you were a fugitive and wanderer of the earth, what did that mean? No protection, no tribe, no safety, no regular sustenance, no guarantee of survival. Today you have driven me away from the soil. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." There you go, the self-protection. And the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer sevenfold vengeance." I think Cain's like, I'm going to use you an example, and you're going to live long, so you remember this, so it's, maybe it's for the future. Jim?
Where do the other people come from?
This is, I have an answer for that in 1 second. Hold on to that question. And the Lord put a mark. Yeah, I know, but seriously, but this is why I say you can't see it as Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, and then there were like 4 of them. And let me also remind you that if it was just the 4 of them and she had 2 boys, and that's all the record of it, in order for the propagation of the species to happen, there were some incestual relationships happening. At some point, it had to diversify. Unless, we'll get to my theory in a second. So Cain then went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So he moved east. So then you get into same chapter, verse 17. Cain knew his wife. So you're like, what? Where did this wife come from? Out of nowhere, this wife is appearing. Now, this is my theory. This is just Jason. I always tell you when it's my theory versus sound biblical. But it's an informed theory. I, as many of you know, fully believe in the evolutionary theory. And I don't see any problem. There's zero contradiction, zero tension between a God that has evolved the world through evolutionary process. Who cares? The Bible says that God created the world. If a zebra evolved from a horse and lost its stripes, what do I care? We were told in the last century that there's this big battle between science and religion, that Darwin was trying to rob God of the glory of creation. Darwin wasn't. That doesn't mean other scientists weren't. Darwin wasn't. Darwin was actually a man of faith, and he was trying to explain the manner in which creation happened, not create a theory that was meant to oppose or contradict creation. So, first of all, but I think when you look back and you look at the mountains we live in, we know how it happens, plates that push up. Well, that doesn't happen in 6,000 years unless God had it on, like, when you listen to your podcast at 3 times, and you're like, it sounds like Mickey Mouse on crack. I just added the crack for humor. But my point being is, I don't think God sped it up. I think God when God put all this into play, the evolution, like we have dinosaur bones, for crying out loud. Like, we're not making this stuff up. There's a logical order to everything, and I have no problem with this evolutionary process. And I'll take it a step farther, and here's where some of you may separate yourselves from my belief system. I have no problem with early Neanderthal people.
Oh, no.
Because we share so much of the same chromosomes. If you buy into the evolutionary process, why couldn't there have been cave people, Neanderthal people, early humanoids, whatever you want to call them, that exist in the world? And here's where I come into this theory. As many of you know, I have a cat that's a Savannah. Does that make it ring a bell? No, my cat is a Savannah. In addition to being worth she was a $5,000 cat. I wanted a Bengal, and I didn't want to pay more than $100 for a cat. So when I was in seminary, I built a website for a breeder, and he gave me a $5,000. He sold his cats for about $20,000. Because it's half serval, half domestic, and then they take the offspring of that and made it with, another one, and then I have a third level one. So he sold them for 20 and then 10 and then 5. But as I watched that process of 2 cats that did not share timing in their gestation period, did not share, they had somewhat similar DNA. And we tried to breed our cat, and it was horrible. It was the worst thing I've ever done. That cat howled for like 2 weeks as she miscarried. Magnificat. But eventually, when we were waiting for these cats get pregnant, and there's a lot of premature cats that die, and this is why they're so expensive. And knowing what I know now about the industry, I would never get a cat like this because of the death that is occurring around this to produce them. But it was that similar but not exact. So here's my theory, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more, is that there were humanoids, Neanderthal people, this is a theory, living in the world, in the wild earth, broken world, Pangea, one thing, and that I 100% believe that God created Adam and Eve and put them in this supernatural garden in this special space that was different. And that when Adam and Eve incarnated and stepped into the world, they shared a genetic compatibility with the Neanderthal people that existed here. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to it in a second. Cain knew his wife. She conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and named it Enoch after his son Enoch. Pride and preservation had to name the city after themselves. We get this in part from the apocryphal book Enoch, keeping that in mind. Enoch, but this is like third generation theoretically. Enoch was born Irad, and then it goes through and it lists all this. This was to this, this was to this, this was to this, and I'm not going to read to you. This is boring. But it comes down to it. And Lamech said to his wives, Adam and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. So we see further sin and death. And if Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son named Seth, and for she said, God has appointed me another child instead of Abel. Because Cain, instead of Abel, meaning Abel was taken and his replacement, because Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord. So we see now that there's still a relationship there. They're calling on the name of Yahweh or whatever the word they were using. I don't know if it probably wasn't the same thing that we know as being Yahweh's name, the tetragram. Okay, so then we jump ahead a chapter, Genesis 6. When people began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. Okay, so the jump here is the people being multiplied on the face of the earth. We don't know who these people are. Either it was a gigantic incestuous ring for several, countless generations, and then you don't have the diversity of the gene pool, if you want to look at it from a scientific perspective, or perhaps my theory might hold some weight. The son, and this is where it says, the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that they were fair. So, the people began to multiply on the face of the ground. You'll return to the ground. You're going to work the ground. You spilled blood on the ground. The word ground is pointing, it's the Adama. It's the word for ground or earth. And it means, to some extent, that which exists in this world. So the sons of God saw that they were fair. So the sons of God, to me, Cain, Abel, Seth, Enosh, these are sons of God. They bear the rationality. They bear the self-awareness. They bear the capacity of knowledge of good and evil in a way that Neanderthal people wouldn't have. And they saw that these earthlings, these Neanderthal women, were fair. And they took them for their wives from themselves of all they chose. So more than one. And then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Again, an emphasis on they're not spirit beings in the same way anymore. Their days shall be numbered 120 years. So we go from thousands of years, 1,000 years from Methuselah to 125. When the Nephilim, which are mentioned before the flood and also mentioned in Leviticus, were on the earth in those days. And this is the question, is what is the Nephilim? The standing traditional interpretation of the Nephilim is that they're fallen angels, and that in part because Nephal means to fall. The Hebrew word Nephal means to fall, so they call them the fallen ones. So the going or the accepted or the normal theory behind this is that there were angels that were evil. They fell to the earth. They became incarnated in some way that they were compatible, and then they had sex with the earth women. Now, for me, this is both mystical, sensationalist, like, I don't know how we get all of this. Why could the fallen ones, the Nephilim, now that doesn't mean they weren't big too, but the Nephilim, or the notion of being fallen could also go back to the fall of Adam and Eve, the ones who have fallen. And in fact, there are similar conjugations of the verb in Hebrew to the one who is anointed, the one who is fallen, the one who has perished. And the idea is that the Nephilim were fallen. Now, were they fallen from the sky as evil angels, or were they fallen as God's first created order of humanity, and they fell from that and they were thrust into the world? The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. When the sons of God went in to the daughters of humans who bore children to them, these were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. Now, I think that part of the reason they were warriors of renown is not only their large size, and maybe those human beings that God had in the garden were bigger than the average one. If you're talking about a human evolving from a monkey in a Neanderthal state, maybe they weren't big, maybe they were small. I can't explain that. But I think the notion that they were the heroes of old, well, if they were big and they had rationality compared to the Neanderthal people, but again, all of this is in the context of self-preservation. And he goes on in 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of human self-preservation was great on the earth, and that every inclination of their thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. So therefore, evil is that which is opposite of God. If evil is self-preservation, because it is that which is opposite of the perichoretical relational trinity, then what he sees is humans that are only concerned with self-preservation. Why do I kill someone else? You pose a threat to me. And the Lord was so sorry that he had made humans on the earth, and therefore you see that anthropomorphic nature of God being sorry, regretting, and grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the humans I've created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I'm sorry I've made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord, and you know the story of Noah. Noah's the only one that's good. It's a horrible story, bodies floating everywhere. And I still sort of think this was the one world Pangea sort of thing. I'm all about Pangea. I don't know how anyone can deny that. All these continents look like they fit together, and it's just, and then they separated. And I think that happened at the Tower of Babel. And again, that's why God broke down the Tower of Babel, not because they built a skyscraper. I mean, if that was the case, Dubai would be in a whole heck of a lot of trouble right now. But no. It's not about how high they built. It probably wasn't even very high. It was probably like three or four stories. They were like, look what we did. And God said, it was about the fact that they were disobeying the commandment to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. There was a sense of going out. So we have this situation where Noah comes, the God floods the earth, and they establish, and what it says in the account as they land on land after about a year in the boat is, again, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and now God says, I give you animals for food, and there will be enmity between you and the animals. And so now we became prey for the animals, and they also became a source of food for us, which changes the whole pastoral shepherd metaphor of nurturing animals for their clothing, for their wool and their milk, and now it's like, we're going to eat you. But God is Levitical law unfolds, does not want certain things to be eaten. You say, why is that? Well, it's like, why don't Jews eat pork? The most common sense is pigs don't sweat. They hold their toxins. There are probably many things that we accept as normative for eating bacon that probably really, bacon is probably not the best meat for us in the world. But so where I want to go in this, and we'll end today, and then we'll pick up the New Testament next week, and and I can fill that a little bit more. But here's what happens, and let me just sort of fast forward. God eventually floods the earth, reestablishes the project. Sin and wickedness still exist. Despite the fact there are stories that go sin after unfaithfulness, they can't follow God's law, but they don't have God's Spirit. They don't have the Holy Spirit, so they're just doing the best they can. Doesn't satisfy God. God decides, I'm going to make a covenant with Abraham. It's credited to him by faith. You have Abraham, who screws up all over the place, and has sex with Hagar, has Ishmael. We have the whole nation of Israel coming from that. By the way, someone came in this week and they said, did you say that God is the God of everything? And I said, no, I did not say that God, the same God that Buddhists worship or that Hindus worship is our God. I said Islam worships the same God. It's a misunderstanding of that God. It's a misunderstanding of the salvation history, but Israel and Christianity and Islam all come from the same understanding and the same interaction with God. So God takes Ishmael and creates another nation. God stays with the promise to Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So you know the stories in sequence. And you have Joseph and Potiphar's wife and the grain and saving up the 7 years. And then what happened is, because of that, God showed favor in that sin and that self-preservation. Then all of a sudden, all these Israelites start going to Egypt, because that's where safety is. 400 years they grow in number. All sorts of things happening. Moses comes along, frees the Israelites. They go out, they're still worshiping, and then really you could say the first collective or corporate sin was idolatry, replacing the divine God with things on this earth as being more powerful than God or more rewarding for worshiping, and you'll get something from that God if you worship it. So putting anything before God. But then they're in the desert, in the wilderness, and Moses goes up into the mountains, and God reveals himself and gives himself a name and becomes more personal, and then says, now I'm going to give you the law. And then the reason I'm going to end there is because I'm going to jump ahead to Romans. And we read this for those of you who were with us in the Romans class. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, Adam, and death came through sin, that's plain as day. That's why we have death. So death spread to all, because all have sinned. For sin was indeed in the world before the law. So I'm not saying sin started when the law came into being. Sin existed, and that's why you can't. And you know what? Here's the thing: sin existed, and the Hebrews design, or Jews define, and Christians do, sin is a violation of God's commandment. Well, there was no law. There was no commandment. And if God has to say, don't murder, clearly it was happening. You're not going to tell your kid not to do something unless they're not doing it. But sin has not been reckoned when there is no law, and that's the most important. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, so the consequences of sin, and this means that sin is more than just action. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who did not sin in the likeness of Adam. Maybe they were just self-preserving, but they didn't have that grave sin of pride and self-preservation, who is pattern of the one who was to come, Adam, and then it goes back to my paper at Wheaton, Adam and Jesus being the same. But the point is this: until the law was in play, until those tablets came down, there was no rule of what sin was. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what was sin? Yeah.
Well, Egypt had laws against committing or killing people, so they knew it was wrong.
But that wasn't a transgression against God's law, and murder happened all the time, probably every day.
But they had laws against it.
Well, for what reason? Probably for self-preservation. You kill, then you're taking something from my tribe. Not in the sense of it is wrong to necessarily perhaps take life. I mean, if you're suggesting they had a moral, ethical, sophistication at that time, that some might have. I mean, here's the thing: in that Nephilim, as we all know, genetics get passed down in different ways. There were the ancient Greeks, yeah. No, and I think that there was some sense of, and I think again that comes from the fact that if you go back to Adam and Eve, ancient Greeks perhaps being in that region had that sense of rationality in a way that they could use that as a sense of base. But the logic for that was not, I'm committing a sin against you because I take your life. in the same way that we probably understand that sin now. We don't take life because we understand it as every image-bearing person is a created order, and if we take their life, then we're removing an image bearer from this world. And that's a violation of the very notion of life, and we don't know when they come to, all sorts of other reasons. But the sophistication of why you do or do not take life, I mean, honestly, well, the Greeks also did a lot of things that were reprehensible alongside of that, I mean, there was, child molestation, pedophilia. So on one hand, they decided they weren't going to kill each other, but they were still violating each other in other ways. So again, this is why for me, I keep going back to this notion of self-preservation. The baseline of sin is self-indulgence, self-protection, self-interest, self-preservation, because that's not how we were designed. And I think that with the advent of the Spirit, we're called to try to recover what was before the fall, which means we try to recover a state or a being or an existence that is constantly self-giving. All right, we'll stop there. Yes, any last questions?
I want to make sure I heard you right. The God of Islam.
Oh yeah, we're going to have this run into a problem.
Is the same God as the Christian God.
Yeah, Muslims worship the same God.
But I thought the Christian God was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Well, we understand it that way.
Okay.
But Jews don't. We took the Jews' notion of who Yahweh was and we changed it. We believe it's a greater fulfillment.
I have Muslim friends. That's why this is important to me. Their Allah is my God.
By a different name.
My God, we're talking about
Yahweh. Let's call Yahweh. I am that I am. So Israel is here in time. This is who God is. Well, Christianity was just new Judaism. It's worshiping the same God. We didn't change gods. Would you agree that we worship the same God as Jews?
Well, but I thought the Jews are waiting for Jesus.
But do we worship the same ultimate being, the God of Israel? Isn't that who we worship?
Yes.
Father? So we worship the same God, right?
Okay.
Muslims are an extension of both, and they worship the same God. They see Jesus as a prophet, a highly exalted prophet, but their word for Allah is just another name for God. We call God Father.
I'm getting your answer. I'm getting it.
So I'm not saying they have a right understanding or a correct understanding, or I think a lot of people cry out to God without our knowledge of who God is.
They're at Abraham. That's right.
But the point is, we have more in common with Islam than we want to readily admit.
Yes.
So now I would think that they went off and they did something wrong, but the way we view Islam is the way the Jews view us.
Okay, I'm getting your answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Something that might go along with your original theory. Didn't God say he created man in his own image, correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So the original Adam and Eve could have been in God's image.
I think they were.
Okay, all right, so we've got it there. But that doesn't mean they're in the form of a unit. So then when
No, because the image is not physical form,
right.
it's
So
capacity.
when we had the fall, maybe God then didn't create them. He turned them into what we are now as humans.
Yeah.
That were all actually already existing.
That sounds pretty wise.
Because we weren't just the.
That's what I said.
I was just backing up.
That's my theory. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if it's true, folks, but honestly, the fallen demons are coming down and becoming human and having sex with humans is just as far-fetched. So,
Can I add that to
Okay.
second thing? And then
Okay. Then they gotta go.
Okay, we have this port, right? Have you ever thought about the Earth as being the prison, like Australia was? We were already here. These fallen angels come down. The humans that were here, we're not all that intelligent, but the fallen angels actually are more intelligent than what we are. They interdispersed with us and actually gave us our intelligence.
But then you're also arguing that those fallen angels had to be incarnated as well. And I think that the act of incarnation in any form is a divine act, not an automatic act.
Well, did God create the angels?
Yes, but then we don't have any record of God saying that God incarnated the angels for the purposes of diversifying our genetic pool. Well, there's more evidence to say that the sons of God came from that line of Adam than they did from. So anyway, all right, well, I'll answer any questions, free to go.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
When God said that he regretted having made man, that just puzzles me. Was that a mistake?
No, I think that's, and this is where something called process theology helps. And although I'm not a process theologian, the idea is that God self-limited and watched the created order unfold. So that God could then say, well, I didn't know this was going to happen. Not because God doesn't have the capacity, but because God self-limited and said, I'm going to actively engage in the created order as a real being with agency, and they will also interact with me. So in that regard, and this is the challenge of the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament, you have an anthropomorphic God that regrets. In the New Testament, you have a perfect God that makes no mistakes. But that's that Hellenized Greco-Roman influence of, as Greeks view their gods, they view them as perfect. And so when you put that Greco-Roman influence onto Christianity, we turned God that was perceivably more like us into this divine amorphous deity. So, all right, folks, next week we'll look at the New Testament and take it from there. Is that okay? You gonna be okay?
And then we come
Meeting at
What did she just say? I don't think I can take any more of that.
This is it.
She's like,
5 o'clock or 6:30?
you know what? You can listen to it later if you get tired. You know.